SillyMickel Adzema again, and this is the 16th Prasad, something I'm calling accumulating things, dominating others. In the 15th Prasad, I paraphrase it like this: You not only created new diseases by which you would perhaps unconsciously seek to bring to an end your denied state of unmitigated suffering. These diseases were added to your uncomfortable, miserable state, poisoned with your early birth trauma, as it was. So you created lives of fundamental suffering in your attempt to better your fates as set by divine providence and within the flows of a divinely ordained nature. We saw you as the suffering planet mate and pitied you. This was in spite of the cruelty that you perpetrated increasingly upon the flora and fauna empires of consciousness, your fellow planet mates. Indeed, rather than anger, your planet mates felt more feelings of pity and compassion toward your species than any other feeling. Your unhappy lots were of your own choosing, it is true, but we understood your crazed brains could not discern easily the way we could. We saw you as sick or emotionally, intellectually deficient. So we did not judge or condemn your actions. In fact, in our compassion, many sought increased spiritual advance through devoting their lives to aiding you, at least in the relief of your suffering, even though at the cost of many a planet mate's life. So some planet mates chose lives as species where they would be close to and able to help you. Pets, you would call them, or, quotes, domesticated animals. And this was done solely out of pure, simple compassion for the unfortunate lots you had created for yourselves. Now, I explained that in the previous video about the 15th Prasad. They're making a larger point. 16th Prasad picks up from or before the 15th Prasad, and it reads like this, quote, the other dire consequence of your adoption of sedentary, non-nomadic lifeways was the ability to gather more, quotes, things. Not just food, but all kinds of things. For you did not have to carry what you owned like a nomad would. When you ceased wandering and set up more permanent abodes, you enabled the gathering and storage of much more than you could possibly need. This had effects on your unplanet mate-like greed and your unplanet mate-like desire to control. Now, sadly, even this, others of your own species. Those of you who gathered more or accumulated more by whatever means could have more, quote, say, and would have more sway over those who gathered less. Big accumulators were able to control the actions and behavior of small accumulators because of their ability to use their excess accumulation to gift or reward those whose actions fit with their ends. Now, a lot of that might be self-explanatory, but it's dense stuff. So in words that might be more easily understood, of course. Your adoption of a non-nomadic lifestyle had other pernicious consequences. When you became sedentary, staying in one place and growing your food, eventually corralling other planet mates and so on, you were able, for the first time in your long evolutionary history, to accumulate. You were able to store food, but other kinds of things as well. This was because when you were nomadic, you naturally had to carry everything you wanted to own. Whereas when you nested, you not only did not have to carry possessions, but you were able to create and build storage areas to protect your accumulations. In this way, you gathered and stored more than you possibly ever need. But it did not end there, because this development led to another cancerous outgrowth in your increasing addiction to controlling your experiences, as opposed to discovering the adventure that divinity would have for your development and furthering on the path back to unity with divinity. This tragic, life-diminishing spin-off of your ability to gather and accumulate excessive things was a desire to control even those of your own species. Your fellow human beings became the last targets of your mania for control, added to your desires to control your experiences, the timing of events, your sustenance and food sources, which involved controlling your planet mates of the flora and fauna kingdoms of consciousness, your lifestyles, in other words, becoming sedentary, and so on. Your unplanetmate-like desire to control expanded your unplanetmate-like greed, and sadly, you saw that gathering more enabled you to control the actions of those of you who gathered less. It was not long before some of your kind discerned that by gathering and storing excessively, becoming big accumulators, they could have more say and more sway over those who were small accumulators. Small accumulators were not necessarily less able to gather more. Keep in mind that gathering more required an obsession and preoccupation with that. Thus, it required an unremitting focus on what is now called greed, manipulation, and power. So, the more congenial and less crazed and obsessed of your kind would not wish this, especially as it required the relinquishing of the other pursuits of life, not involving accumulation. For example, the relational, emotional, spiritual, and creative pursuits of life. Many who would choose to accumulate only that which was needed to sustain life and little more, so that time would be available for more fulfilling pursuits, thought the narrowing of focus to simply possessing more a sad diminishment of experience, which it was. But this choice to use some of one's time in the pursuit of a fulfilling life, opposed to just the pursuit piles of things, also left them, meaning the small accumulators, more vulnerable to the big accumulators who could tempt and persuade the small accumulators to act in concert with them through promises of gifts and rewards. The stage was set for big accumulators who had accepted a reduced spiritual and personal richness for a richness of things to overpower and silence the voices of those who refused such a diminished richness of experience and narrowing of their personality. A narrowing of personality that left out the grandeur of existence more for them than for any other, quote, thing of consciousness, living or, quote, non-living on this planet. So what it comes down to is this. They're saying that we stopped being nomadic. This allowed us to accumulate things. People who accumulated more and focused on accumulating more found that they could control other people with that. We already had an obsession with controlling all kinds of things. Now we became obsessed with controlling others, and they became focused on accumulating a lot in order to do that. Meanwhile, there were those of us who did not want to give up the other aspects of life, did not want to focus just on sort of making a living, making money in this day and age. They want to do other things with their time as being alive. And so they had a fuller life, but they had less power. They could be manipulated by the big accumulators. Now, the interesting thing is that what they're saying is that this narrowing of consciousness that the big accumulators had, this narrowing of consciousness to just accumulating and then using that accumulation to use it to manipulate and have power over other people, this obsession with control became their whole life. And this diminishment of their life was more of a diminishment of consciousness than any of the rest of their species, any other species of fauna or flora, and even of consciousness of non-living things. Meaning, like, everything is consciousness, even stones, even what we call the physical world is consciousness. And this diminishment, we suppose high evolution, is actually the smallest narrowing of consciousness of all. So that makes sense. That's the opposite of what we think. But if they're right, it explains why this diminished consciousness is so stupid as to be able to bring about the end of this planet without caring about it. I'm not going to elaborate about that. I'm not going to try and talk anybody into that. I'm just saying what they're saying. It does explain why the people with the most power and the most money will be the stupidest when it comes to controlling or taking care of this planet. Because they really have the smallest consciousness, because they're obsessed with only one thing and they cannot see outside of it. Let's just say they're not liberal arts majors, okay? I mean, they're hardly generalists. You know, that's all I got to say. This has been the 16th Prasad, and this is SillyMickel Adzema, out.